In this video, we're going to go through a list of things to think about before you put a plant into the ground. I know the funnest part of gardening is going out and shopping for plants for sure, and coming home, and it's super rewarding to get them in the ground and go look what I did. But I had a retail place at the Raleigh Farmers Market for a couple of decades, and a space at the Greensboro Farmers Market and a garden center, and I got a lot of the same questions, over and over and over. And so I'd like to go through a few of those things to think about before you put things in the ground. Part of it is design based, part of it is just knowing, is it a healthy plant? And one of the main things is what type of space do I have in my own garden? I would get one of the biggest arguments I could get at the Raleigh Farmers Market was a couple coming in and them going, we need some plants for our foundation, or we need some plants for this. And I go, is it sunny or shady? And maybe new to the house or whatever, or one of them is home more than the other one or whatever. And no, it's shady, no, it's sunny, no, it's shady. And so it was really hard to just find the starting point for what plants to get. So being observational about the space that you have, before you head out plant shopping, kind of understanding the space. Sometimes it takes a little while. You may move into a house, and for the first year you live there, the area gets below normal rainfall. And then like this spring and early summer, I've done some consultations with folks who have found out that some of the spaces in their gardens that they thought were mostly just kind of normal, it rains and dries out, are quite wet during wet times. And so that can, those kinds of things you'll figure out about a space in time. The main thing about sun is it's in between like 10 and 4 in the afternoon, 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. The time that you would need to go out with sunscreen on is the important time. So being sunny at 8 in the morning or being sunny at 7:30 in the evening is not sun that we would call full sun. It needs to have some portion of that 10 to 4 o'clock if you're going out shopping for full sun plants. It definitely needs that time of day. So make sure, again, before you leave the house, when you're thinking about it, maybe make some sort of little small drawing too of the space. Anything that could be helpful to the person at the garden center on the other end in helping you match a plant up with what you need. And the other thing is what you're trying to accomplish. That's the other thing that that the salesperson on the other end will need. Are you trying to screen a neighbor? Are you trying to have low maintenance foundation plants? Are you trying to do some sort of mailbox garden, hide an electric box, whatever it is? And that way that can help you match up some things. If you want to research it on your own, that's good. The internet can be helpful in some ways and kind of hurtful in others. When I search things on especially on AI quite a bit for individual plants. I think AI definitely has its benefits maybe in helping you with some rough designs, that kind of thing. It may be helpful to upload a photo there and get maybe 10 options for different designs, layouts and that kind of thing. Maybe a layout for paths if that's not your strength, or you're struggling to find that, to get that going, since this may be the only place you ever have to design, so that may be helpful. But when it comes to picking individual plants, I've noticed a tendency, if I say name the best screening plants for such and such area, it almost always returns the same plants. Even when I'm searching them across the country, it's returning the same plants because it seems to be measuring kind of the history of the internet a little bit. So Leyland cypress, and Nellie Stevens and hollies and green giant arborvitae and emerald arborvitae, it kind of returns the same things over and over and over again. And we like to get as many diverse options in the landscape as possible, because I don't want to go all in on something. So be open to additional things that you may find out in the world. Our screen in the back garden has 13 different plants in it. That way that we don't lose something, if we get a disease or insect problem. So, be open to the fact that there's probably a lot more out there than you'll find even in your own research, at a computer at the house. I would talk about frequently going over to the Ralston Arboretum here in Raleigh, or Duke Gardens, or we have a lot of different options here. I'm sure you do in your area as well, to go out and also look for some things, write down a bunch of things that you would look at and say, well, that kind of fits the screening size plant that I'm looking for. Make notes on those things and then shop for them from there. when you figured out your space, kind of figured out what your goals are in your garden to start off on whatever project you're starting off on, you head to the garden center, you know, take stock in how it's laid out. You know, and we worked at Rake and Hoe Garden Center as kids, Steph and I did, and we had a lath house that with the shade stuff, and we had, you know, most of the low growing evergreen shrubs were together, the screening plants were kind of together, the trees were kind of together, the annuals were all on tables, you know, the seasonal plants, the perennials had an entire section next to a greenhouse. I mean, it was all laid out in some way like that. Now you'll pick up a native plant section in all likelihood. A lot of the brand stuff might be together, the Southern Living Plant Collection stuff, the Proven Winter stuff, you know, all the branded items, you know, will be there as well. But, you know, spend some time, you know, looking around, taking it in, read some tags. And then the staff at local garden centers, and there's a video either before this or after this on visiting local garden centers, you know, are going to be great. That's the one thing that they really have, is they got local people, local knowledge of your soil. I mean, if you're just in the state of North Carolina, the mountains in our state, you know, we have zone 6 areas up in the mountains, that gets a lot of rain up there, a whole lot of rain up there. It's a different type of gardening completely. And one side of a mountain to the other can be, you know, zone 5B to 7A, you know, I mean, you know, that kind of thing. I used to play softball in a town called Valley Crucis down below Boone, and to be 90 degrees on the softball field in Valley Crucis, and you go up the hill and it's 75 degrees in Boone, you know, that same day, 78 degrees. That's just in the mountains. Here in our area, in our part of the state, Raleigh has clay-based soils. We can drive 45 minutes to an hour and be in just pure sand in the sand hills. And then the eastern part of our state is very sandy as well. So even within our state, finding a garden center that's in one of those areas that matches that soil is probably going to be helpful, because they're going to be the most knowledgeable about those spaces. So, you know, use that as a resource for sure. Once you know the space you're going to be planting in, let's say it's a, you know, full sun space, it doesn't seem to be, you know, ongoing wet in any sort of way. Then you go to the garden center and you want, you know, here, this is an example, this is a Veronica, but this is an example of a flowering perennial, but you might be looking for shrubs or trees or whatever it is. You know, I will inspect the plant, you know, beyond just looking at it. Obviously, the top of this plant looks pretty healthy. We're near the end of summer, so the flowering is slowing down a bit. You know, yeah, I'd love to buy it in full peak flower, and we did a few weeks ago, but now, you know, it's spent a little more time in this container, a little more time without me watering it as well. So it's slowing down a bit, but that would be kind of normal for late summer. But if I pop this thing out of the ground, out of the container, you'll notice it's pretty root bound. And I'll address this when I put it in the ground. I'm not that worried about this. I mean, they're healthy roots. They're not dead. You know, if I pull on them, you know, they're still, you know, I can do this. What worries me is that, you know, when you're shopping for plants and you go to a clearance area, make sure this is more important, shopping for clearance plants, because a lot of those things some of them have been overwatered, and once they get overwatered and get root rot, the plant's likely going to die. Or maybe you can save it, but it's pretty doubtful. So again, flip them over. A lot of times what it was is the plant was a little root bound and it didn't get watered on the shelf, and then it started to slow down flowering, or almost stopped flowering, and then it got moved over there. Well, that's no big deal. I'll show you how to deal with this in just a minute. But sometimes the alternative happens. It got watered a lot and too much, and the roots will be just kind of slimy. They'll be, you know, I won't be able to pull on one and not have it break off. So, you know, if you pull one out of the pot and it just says, if it says rotten roots or has a funny smell to it, that one's one I'm definitely going to leave behind. I do not want to introduce that into my landscape. You know, the frustration of having dug it in and then it died, or, you know, potentially maybe you bring something home that you didn't want to ultimately bring home. Make sure you look at the tag, make sure it meets your the cultural requirements that you have for your garden, or ask a salesperson. When you do flip them over, you know, support it like this right here, because sometimes we can pull this off and it's not rooted in, and then soil falls off in every direction. I'll leave that up to you on whether or not I'm going to take that home and plant it. If it's almost held together and only a small part of the soil is going to fall off, I may not worry about that. But if it's just not rooted into the container at all, and it has a giant top on it like this and virtually no roots, that may not transplant well. It may transplant well in perfect planting conditions, you know, if it was the ideal day to plant it, it was overcast and it was cool and all those kinds of things. But on a 95-degree day, this big giant perennial with no roots on it's probably not going to be great. And then there's the extreme of root. I call this root bound, but it's not that bad. It can move well past this and basically just virtually be nothing but roots. And that may be, you know, again, you can get away with that. You can chop these roots up, but it would have to be on a day that's kind of the ideal planting day and not the coldest day, the wettest day, the hottest day, that kind of thing. A lot of times we just end up buying plants when we didn't intend to buy plants. That just happens. Maybe something's on a clearance sale, whatever it is. We bring them home, we're not ready to plant them, or it's 95 degrees outside, it hadn't rained in 2 weeks, and we don't want to be out there in it. The bed's not ready, whatever. Lots of reasons you end up collecting plants at times, and they end up staying in containers. We will usually hold all of ours together in one spot. Leave some space between them. I wouldn't put them right up against one another while they're growing during the summertime. Leave a little space between them, but near a water source, so that if you have to drag that water hose across the garden every time you need to water these 4 plants that aren't in the ground, or 10 plants, or some people may have 50 plants, then it's not going to go well. You know, some of these things are going to need to be watered very differently as well. This actively growing herbaceous perennial that's in flower with root-bound roots like this is going to need water maybe 2 times a day. Okay, that's a possibility. My shrub that's barely rooted into it, that's in some sort of a bit of a summer dormancy, may hardly need any water at all. So you can begin, make sure, I wouldn't water everything that's in that spot the same, okay? You'll figure it out. You can tell by the top, you can put your finger down in one of these. This one's dry. Right now it's dry. I can see it's dry. In fact, it's shrunk, because it's dry. That's why it's so easy to get in and out of the container, is because it's, the material actually shrunk a little bit. So it needs water this morning. But we'll separate things by need a little bit, but leave them in the same general area to make sure that we're watering them while we're waiting for whatever conditions to change to be able to put them in the ground. Sometimes you're going to leave the house, go to a garden center, go to a box store, wherever you're shopping for plants, nursery that's open to the public, whatever. You're going to have a plan. You're going to come home and execute that plan. You got 4 different things you're using for your screen. You're going to line them up. You're going to put them in the ground, and it's done. But frequently you're going to come home with something like this, Veronica, and you had no idea why you bought it other than it was pretty in the container. And then it's like, well, where is it going to go in the garden? This is something I talk about pretty frequently in consultations, because there's a lot of folks, we have a one-of-a-kind, or drifts of one, I would call it, garden out here. As you can see in any video, or if you've come to one of the open garden events, we have, there's multiple peonies here that are fading back, but rarely is there multiple of anything out here. There's one. We love plants, and so we have as many as we possibly can. It creates a very healthy garden, but it's very hard to design in that situation, right? When you have one of everything and you're trying to figure out how to match them up. So here's my big tip for this video is you don't have to plant it right when you get home. You can move it around the garden over time, and the plant will kind of find its place. What we're looking for ultimately is to have each individual plant stand out because it contrasts with its neighbor in some way. So that can be how broad the leaf is, that can be the color of the flower, that can be the color of the foliage, that can be the shape of the plant, one being tall and skinny and the next one being mounded, whatever it is, that they contrast with one another a bit. And it allows, each individual plant to kind of stand out. If you look at this, the barberry next to the pittosporum with a, strappy foliage behind it, and a boxwood, and then the large leaf on the on the redbud. All of these things are contrasting with one another in some way, and each individual piece still somehow stands out in that. It may not look perfect right now because it's August when we're filming this, and the heat has added up a little bit in the garden over the course of the summer. But so I'll take a plant, and here's a spot. It meets the cultural requirements because this plant needs full sun, or a lot of, at least close to full sun. and it doesn't want to stay wet. It goes to sleep in the wintertime, so it's not going to want to sit in water in the wintertime. So there's a spot for it. Now, I don't have to plant it there immediately. I can actually carry it to several more places in the garden. And eventually, we have always found that it will land in the spot that it was always supposed to be. Which is kind of a weird thing, but if you move it 3-4 times, you know, go to work, come back home, you know, and see if you still like it in that spot, you can do this one-of-a-kind landscaping that way. And the plants will weirdly just kind of end up telling you where they belong. We have a couple of small perennial groupings out here in the front garden, and then we have an annual border that runs around the front. This salvia, which doesn't necessarily match this Veronica all that well, would not end up there next year. We went with really hot colors along this line. But this is a good spot. It gets sun all day, stays moist but not wet. We have done a lot of pre-prep out here, so we don't have to come home and think about you know, prepping the soil or prepping the space in any way or getting rid of turf. You know, everything we have is already bed. We had put wood chips out here, and this is wood chips in our paths out here. We had put a deep layer of wood chips that have broken down over time. We've continued to have it mulched, it's weeded. Everything out here, we can just come home and dig a hole. So all that prep was done in the front end. But you may, you know, if you're coming home and it's new beds, you know, make sure you're asking what amendments, you know, work well in your area. If you need any amendments at all, you don't necessarily need them. But if you need compost, you're going to need mulch, you know, after you've finished planting it. You know, there probably are some things that you need, although I don't think you need probably as many things as somebody wants to sell you. But I will say that we've done a lot of upfront prep here. I would highly recommend that. You know, if you're, you know, have some sort of long-term landscape plan to evolve a space in time, you know, we did this wood chip method that I've talked about quite a bit over the years. So what I know about this plant is what you've already seen as I've toted it all over the garden and looked for various places to put it, that it's a little bit root bound. So these roots need to be cut a little bit. Now, if I cut 20% of these roots off or damage 20% of these roots in the process of trying to get this root ball a bit loosened up, how's it going to support? It was already struggling to support these flowers on top, so it's just not going to be able to. And so I'm actually going to take these flowers off, which I know a lot of people wouldn't want to do. I have another option. I can enjoy it. Well, it's not peak flower anymore. It was super showy 2 weeks ago. But I could have enjoyed it in peak flower in the container and then planted it, you know, once it started to slow down. You know, that would have been, that's an option as well. But I'll go through here and just take these flowers right off the top. This is where the thing's using all the water and it's using all the energy. Probably should have already done this right when I brought it home if I knew I wasn't going to put it in the ground for a little while. You know, not going to hurt that plant at all in the future, what I just did to it. But now, when I pull it out of the container, and let me dig this hole first. So I'm going to dig an approximate hole to, you know, that's a full 1 gallon container. A lot of what you'll see out in the world in these smaller containers is a 3-quart, you know, a 3-quart trade gallon, people call it, but this is an actual gallon container. I'll make sure I pull back my hardwood mulch a bit, you know, any of the chunky material that's here, and get down to my compost layer. All of this was created from wood chips breaking down. So you can see out here, you know, this, how you have to go down pretty far to find the clay now. I can find it. I mean, if we get down, you know, if I get down here far enough, I can, but we have done all this on the top. Now, so I don't really have to dig a wider, deeper hole. You know, a lot of times people will tell you to dig, you know, twice as wide, you know, or twice as a little bit deeper and twice as wide, or 3 times as wide, that kind of thing. I don't really need to do that because I've amended all of it. So the roots are going to be able to spread out into that without me having to do any of that. But if you haven't, you may want to dig a bigger hole. Let me see. I got 1 daffodil bulb I have found here. I'm going to pull up. I pulled it to the side. I'll replant it somewhere else. So that's basically it. And then the biggest part of this particular plant is that I need to work on these roots some. You see this bottom part right here where it's just they've wrapped around in the bottom, and it's you know, like that. I can just come in here with my hand and break this apart. I need to water this plant. I don't know why I haven't watered the plant. I'm shooting this video and not thinking about the fact that I need to put this in the ground already wet a little bit. So I should have watered this plant well before I put it in the ground. I'm gonna put it in the ground and then I'm gonna water it well. So do as I say and not as I do, I guess is what people say when that happens. But normally I should have watered this thoroughly before I'm putting it in the ground. But you see how I'm fairly aggressive with this, and I'm not worried about it because I've cut this top off, and it's not gonna it doesn't have to use quite as much water the rest of the day as it has been. But I got most of these roots now heading out, you know, away from the interior of the plant. And I'll stick it in here, make sure it's at, you know, slightly above the original grade. So if I say the original grade is right there, I can take a hand tool and put it across there and make sure that it's slightly higher than that original grade. And then we can knock this soil in here. And then we don't want to cover up, we don't want to bury this root ball in too much material. Made a little bit more of a mess than I normally make as I've been talking. Okay. Okay, then once I get that tamped down, I'll put my mulch, my original mulch, back around it and save this daffodil bulb. But that's my mulch, and there you go, it's in the ground. Quick and easy. It's a little bit of a crowded neighborhood, but we want that for our perennials because we want them to compete with one another just a little bit, and be close enough to one another to help us prevent some weeds out here. And that's how perennials grow. They grow close together. You go to interesting places that have perennial borders, all the perennials are stacked in there pretty tight. So that's completely normal. We made a list of the few things we definitely want to remember as we were talking about shopping for a plant and bringing it home and trying to decide where it was gonna go in the garden, blah, 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 and talk through it. But then somehow water, root ball, and pot first to prevent transplant shock was on the list. You know, and as I was sitting there planting it, I was like, we didn't water it. So making sure that I do thoroughly water it now. I brought this out to water in the container, but we'll get a water hose over here. It'll probably take a couple waterings to re-wet that dry root ball, so keep that in mind. The first one may not completely resaturate that root ball, but you know, I can either refill this or bring that water hose over here and make sure that it's watered in really well. And then we'll let it dry out between waterings. I've rebalanced that plant a bit, you know, by taking that new growth off of it and taking those flowers off of it. So I don't expect there'll be any problem whatsoever. The other thing you may see and be tempted to buy would be fertilizer. And I'm not gonna fertilize at the beginning of August as I'm planting this plant in the ground. We fertilized the entire garden back in March with an organic fertilizer. Everything else, and then the rest of what's feeding these plants is I have all that compost you just saw from these wood chips breaking down and my mulch breaking down and the earthworms and everything else doing their magic in here is plenty to keep this plant in good shape. I'm definitely not going to put a root bound perennial in the ground in the beginning of August, pull roots apart on it, prune it back, and then hit it with fertilizer and act like it's supposed to grow immediately. It's probably not a good strategy. Just let it settle in. Keep it moist but not wet, and let it settle in. It's going to go dormant in October or November. It's going to go back to the ground. Your shrubs and things would not, but this particular plant is going to die back to the ground. It's going to come back bigger, better, fuller next year and compete beautifully with these cone flowers that are sitting next to it. So there's some thoughts on, you know, things to think about and things to do before you just, you know, come home and stick a plant in the ground. Ultimately, I like a very long-term strategy. Maybe you pick some area in your garden it's to play with and have fun now, but some of the other spaces where you're going to really expand in the future, go ahead and get started on the soil part sooner than later, because the soil's everything. Because this place has been fully treated, you know, the soil's been, you know, prepped the entire garden. We just get to come home with plants, and as soon as we move it around a few times, figure out where we want it, boom, we can dig a hole and put it in the ground quick and easy, because all the prep has been done up front. So there's some thoughts on what to do before you put the plant directly in the ground. Thanks for watching.